Can Georgia Tech upset North Carolina for a third straight year? My name is Bryce Koon. We're previewing the Tar Heels and the Jackets homecoming in Bobby Dodd here on this episode of Swarm Talk, brought to you by the Crowded Booth.
Pile in here and make yourself feel at home. The Crowded Booth is coming on. The Crowded Booth with Bryce Koon.
Welcome in, everybody, and happy Friday morning. We didn't get to you live. We're recording this late Thursday night. We appreciate you checking out the channel and checking out the show. Make sure to subscribe. Make sure to like the video. Make sure to comment down below your thoughts and your predictions, as well as Georgia Tech host North Carolina. And look, folks, this is a matchup that I don't want to say you have to throw out a lot of things. We're going to talk about it. Let me fix the AirPods here. We're going to talk about it. We're going to walk through kind of what this could look like. But I do want to make it clear. The last 2 years, I have predicted North Carolina to win. Last year, predicted them to win big, and couldn't be more wrong. So before we even get into it, I'm going to think about this. I haven't made my pick yet in my head. I'll tell you that much. But should I go reverse psychology, continue with that? Or do I actually try to pick Georgia Tech to get the upset? You have to stay tuned to the rest of the show to figure it out. Let's talk a little bit about where North Carolina has come since they last played. Obviously suffering a loss to Virginia, which a lot of people, including myself, thought was no doubt the worst team in the ACC, but one of the worst Power 5 programs in the country this year. They were a 20-point favorite against a team whose only win was an FCS victory. Up until that game, they had been scoring 31 points in at least 31 points, I should say, in each of their first 6 games. Drake May was coming off a 4-touchdown performance the week before. Marion Hampton had a near 200-yard rushing game against Miami the week before. But what went wrong? And it really comes down to a couple of things we're going to talk about with what North Carolina did. Was the defense for the Tar Heels eerily, while it has been better under Gene Chizik, eerily looked like the 2022 version, and the offense for the Tar Heels only scored 1 second-half touchdown. Whether Virginia made better plays, whether it was a play calling, I'm going to get into all of this as we get rolling here. Where does Georgia Tech come into? Well, obviously the loss to Boston College was something you don't want to see. It's a loss that, if we're being honest with ourselves, probably shouldn't have happened, but it did. Boston College was the better team that day. They executed at a higher level. They just played flat out better football on that Saturday. It sets the stage for what should be a very, very fun weekend in Atlanta. Obviously, ACC Network going to be on hand on campus on Friday. They're going to be obviously on campus Saturday, and it's an 8 p.m. Eastern start time. And if you want to, we're going to have a post-game live call-in reaction show to the game following around 10, 15 minutes following the conclusion of that football game right here on the YouTube channel. But if we're honest with ourselves, Georgia Tech, and taking a look at this from the 30,000-foot view approach before we kind of get into the matchups, North Carolina has been a team that up until last week I would say isn't really too hard to figure out. I mean, they are who they are. They've got a quarterback that's on the top 3, top 4, top 5 quarterbacks in draft eligible going into next April's NFL draft. Georgia Tech, on the other hand, is kind of been a tough team to figure out. It's been a group that has done some things well, but it's also been a group that has done things not so well at times. Very up and down season. Beat Wake Forest by 2 touchdowns on the road, upset Miami in Hard Rock Stadium, and then loses to a then 1-win Bowling Green. Bowling Green's actually 4-4 now, and then obviously loses to Boston College. So where does it leave us coming into this game? So let's take a look right here. We're going to go take first the Georgia Tech offense versus the UNC defense. A couple numbers, a couple stats for you to live by on this fantastic Friday morning. North Carolina comes ranked 64th in the country in total defense. Now, diving more into those numbers, they're giving up an average of 5.29 yards per play. They are scoring offensively 18 touchdowns, while defenses are scoring, or other teams are scoring 19 touchdowns against their team, and they're giving up an average of 370.6 yards per game. North Carolina, like we talked about, it really the defense regressed. I don't think there's any doubt about the fact that, the defense regressed. But I think when you take a look at this offense, there's There's a couple of things. Brent Key talked about this. We'll tackle number one on the Georgia Tech side of things. The question was posed to Brent Key about whether he thought that this group, what are some of the fixes, and he mentioned, and this is something that applaud him because he often doesn't get too specific with answers, but this is something that he said that I did agree with. He said it's going to be personnel based, they think. The three names that I want you to pencil in that will have to have good days, I think, in order for Georgia Tech to win. It's going to have to be the return of a guy like Eric Singleton Jr. Is this a guy that can come back into the fold, can come back into some, plays and be that playmaker that he was throughout the season's first 6 games? Another name, Chase Lane. Georgia Tech's offense has desperately missed Chase Lane and having a really bona fide playmaker on the other side of the football field across from Eric Singleton, and a guy that Haynes King is obviously very, very comfortable with. We talked about this group. Yes, Haynes King did not have a great game last Saturday, but the separation of the wide receivers was something that had to be questioned as well. Those two guys provide just that. And then the third name in this passing attack is Avery Boyd. Brent Key mentioned his press conference. My good friend Rod McKenzie asked the question and said just flat out, like, this is something where, is he going to play more? Because in the limited options and limited time that he has had, he has been efficient. He had that kind of, midline screen, you can call it that, for the touchdown pass that was above the line of scrimmage. I think that when we look at what this offense has to do, if you insert from a personnel standpoint a heavier dosage of Avery Boyd, you get Eric Singleton back, and you get Chase Lane back in this football game, there's your recipe of what was working for you so well early on in the season. Now you feel like you've got 3 bona fide weapons, and you can mix and match guys like Malik Rutherford, guys like Dominic Blaylock, who have been productive at times. I just think when we talk about route runners creating separation, those 3 guys in different ways are probably the best, most talented individuals at doing that. Tech has missed having, obviously, Chase Lane. They missed having Eric Singleton Jr. on the field, and they haven't used Avery Boyd a lot, but it's something that I think, and Key alluded to it, he and Buster Faulkner kind of went back to the drawing board on Saturday night, and we're honest with ourselves, like we've got to be able to do some different things. And so if that shakeup is true, if the shakeup is indeed what they're going to go, this is a good recipe for them to try to go win the football game and be effective offensively. North Carolina's defense has been suspect at times, and I think this is a good opportunity for Haynes King to get back into the picture, leading the ACC with 17 touchdown passes. He's got 1,800 yards, for third in the ACC. I think this is a game where North Carolina could struggle to contain what Haynes King can do if a couple things go right. We mentioned the weapons getting separation. Where he obviously pressed last week, if he can flip that switch and get back to where he was through the first couple of games, not the past 3 where he's had, it feels like he's averaged at least 2 turnovers by himself over the past 3 games. That also being said, when we talk about Haynes King having success against this North Carolina defense, we also have to bring into the fold here that this is going to be a group that has to run the football. Georgia Tech has not had really any semblance of a rushing game, and I think also Brent Key really summed this up well. Yes, the final stat line and the numbers look good, but it's probably because of the usage, the amount of times they're running the football. But when you really get into the analytical side of things, what Key said, they are not capitalizing when they need to in certain situations on the ground. He used a great metaphor in, 2nd and 9. What you would like to be able to run the football to set up a third manageable where it brings more options to the table. They haven't been successful enough on 2nd and 9, 2nd and 8 to be able to do just that. So this run game is going to have to be better, whether that is Travion Cooley, whether that is Dante Smith getting more action, physical runner in between the tackles, or Jamal Haynes, who I think is more of an outside guy. I mean, I think, we've seen it. He had the touchdown run against Boston College where he showed that speed off. So all of these things we're sitting here saying is this is something where it helps Haynes King. And much like what Brent Key talked about, it's something, too, that you have to be able to sit there and say, we have to play well around him. A lot of people, and I get it, the frustration and, the calls for the backup quarterback. The backup quarterback is the most, sought-after person when struggle and strife occurs on a football team, and especially offensively. But when you take a larger look at this, if King is pressing because he doesn't feel like there's a lot of help, which I think is a valid thing to say over the past couple of games, it makes sense to why he's doing that. The thing that's going to be able to turn the tide for him, and we're going to see, I think, in this football game against a defense that's not lights out by any means, is when things are going well around him, is he still making those bad decisions? Is he still pressing? If he's not, then you feel comfortable. If he is, then we can obviously welcome the conversation of what would it look like to go somewhere else at that quarterback position. But I think as for that, this offense has to be able to run the football. The offensive line has got to be aggressive at the point of attack. They've got to execute. You can't take away a lot from what Weston Franklin said in the media on earlier this week. But what you can do is you can say they just got to execute better. They have got to be more physical. They've got to drive guys back. They've got to create opportunities, lanes, holes for these guys to run through. If that doesn't happen, you see a lot of improvising. We've seen a lot of that at Georgia Tech over the past couple of years. And then the final thing that I mentioned, obviously, earlier, Chase Lane, Eric Singleton, and Avery Boyd. If those three guys can have nice games, this Georgia Tech offense could really be humming along. It's a big take, but we'll see, obviously, as well with what they're going to be able to do. We take a look now, and we want to shout out our sponsor, Section 103. Make sure you use code CROWDEDBOOTH for 10% off your first order. Some fantastic gear. They are the headlining sponsor here of Swarm Talk, the Georgia Tech podcast here on the Crowded Booth. We go now to the defense of the Jackets against the UNC offense. And I think this is something where I am curious to what Chip Lindsey, North Carolina's offensive coordinator, does in this game. We know that this is a rushing defense for Georgia Tech that is not very stout. They know it. Georgia Tech knows it. Everyone in the world knows it. But something that was really interesting against a team that really wasn't stout against the run last week is that the Tar Heels seemingly, and Chip Lindsey, did this, is they just abandoned the run, especially in that second half. They were out carried in that game. Listen to this, 54-29. And you would think in a game like that where, Virginia, having the success they did, ran the ball 54 times in this game. North Carolina ran it just 29. I mentioned sophomore running back Amarian Hampton, who has just been an absolute stud for this North Carolina team. He had scored at least one touchdown in 5 of UNC's first 6 matchups. And I have to say, had the big one against Appalachian State earlier this season. The production in the run game was one of the big reasons. Yes, they have Drake May. They've got a star, quarterback that can do a lot of things. But the balance of this North Carolina offense was the reason that they were undefeated heading into last week. And they went away from it. So if I'm a North Carolina fan, I am begging Mack Brown and Chip Lindsey to sit here and say, run the football against this team. Drake May last week only completed 50% of his passes, and he threw 48 times. Can Drake May be successful throwing the football? Yes, we've seen it. We know what he can do. But when you have a balanced attack, that's one of the reasons why North Carolina thought that they might have an outside shot of getting to Charlotte. I don't want to say an outside; they were firmly in the mix and could proceed as a dark horse contender for the college football playoff because they had been so balanced offensively. But they just went away from it. And I think when you look at that stat, getting outgained 54-29 against a Virginia offense that struggled so badly, I don't get that. So I think if North Carolina wants to win the football game, they have to run the football. There's just no ifs and buts about it. 48 passes and 29 runs. Virginia boasted might not be the right word. One of the worst run defenses in the country. And Chip Lindsey just kept dialing up pass play after pass play. Here's a stat for you. The only team per NCAA.com that is worse than Virginia in the ACC in run defense is Georgia Tech, who ranks 129th, giving up an average of 227 yards per game. If we're playing the theoretical game, if we are playing what should happen from a coaching perspective, from a, whatever you want to say here, Amarian Hampton theoretically should have a field day against this Georgia Tech defense. This team should use the run almost exclusively to set up the pass, play action, and just wear down a Georgia Tech defense that is probably not as deep and has multiple issues at the linebacker position, has a secondary that is more physically beat up than I think that we've seen in a while due to linebacker issues, and a front seven that doesn't really inspire me against a offensive line that can do some good things and has done good things at times. Don't abandon the run, and North Carolina theoretically should win this game, right? Very interesting. I think sometimes we see offensive coordinators think that the football is a game. It's like rocket science, and I don't understand that. I think that if North Carolina shows up with a balanced game plan against the Yellow Jackets defense, they should be able to win. I mean, they should be able to win the football game. In all obviously, and being honest in that in general. We talked about Hampton having success. We talked about Drake May. I mean, look, this is something where you start to kind of see what your team's made of. And so when we talk about Georgia Tech defense, but we talked about UNC's offense, what they're good at, what they do. They've obviously got some weapons on the outside that they can use. But I think this game is more about Georgia Tech's defense, because we're at a point where I don't think that you can continue to say, well, if this team messes up or this team messes up, or if they don't do well in this, they don't do well in that. Look, a lot of folks just want to say, well, what if we just play really well? What happens then? And I think that this is a game where you can say, look, I've said it before, for Georgia Tech to win games under Brent Key, it feels like it takes something extraordinary, a stat that just looks off the charts to be able to do that, or a situation that looks kind of crazy to do that. This defense is going to need to play their best football game of the season to win this football game. The linebackers are going to have to step up. I've mentioned it, multiple times. It is not normal for this juncture in the season for have so many guys rotating through. If it is Kyle Eford, if that's the guy, okay, then let's rock and roll. Ricky talked about he liked his leadership, he likes his passion. Well, then let's play football. Let's strap it up and let's go. The defensive line has got to be disruptive up front. Daquan Dowse, Zeke Biggers, Horace Lockett, who has emerged. These guys have Kyle Kennard. All of these guys have to be disruptive. This has to be almost like a performance where you really leave it all out there and you force this team in North Carolina to resort to throwing 40, 45 passes during the game, because then you feel like you have a better chance, because this team thrives on running the football. No one's really been able to stop them running the football except for themselves. And it's just really, really interesting. So I think this defense is going to have to step up. They're going to have to play a clean game, play a sound football game. And if these linebackers can just play assignment sound football, it sounds so simple, but you saw, if you tuned into our film review, that we just can't seem to, get going consistently. If you saw that, it's hesitation, it's, passive play. It's a lot of different things that this group has to kind of work through and do to be able to accomplish what they want. And I think that's where folks are kind of tired of seeing and hearing, well, we're working on that, because playing like that doesn't require getting, it does to a certain extent, getting into the film room, but man, effort and aggressiveness is not necessarily something you can teach. Guys either have that or they don't. And so I think that this is going to be a big sign for this defense to see, do they have that aggressiveness in them, the ability to bounce back? Yeah, we can talk about win-loss, win-loss, win-loss. Throw all that out the window. Georgia Tech can win this football game. One thing Mac Brown mentioned in his press available this week is that, at the last 12 times that North Carolina has been down to Atlanta, Georgia Tech has won 10 of those matchups. They've won the last 2. Obviously, that's great stuff, but this is a different year. This is a different football team. You're going to learn a lot about this football team under the lights at Bobby Dodd and the way this group can respond, because both sides of the football have obviously been very, very topsy-turvy, in the sense of what they have been trying to do. And if you can get consistent play, consistent yet aggressive play and sound play, Georgia Tech can win this football game. It's one of those things where, yes, there's talent deficiencies at certain places, but when Georgia Tech plays sound football and aggressive, they can win football games. That's one of the things that they can do. We just haven't seen enough of it, and we haven't seen it consistently enough of it. That's the one thing I would disagree, when Key talks about the idea of we've been able to do it. Yes, but just not consistent enough. And he's acknowledged a little bit of that, but I just think in this game, you're going to have a bunch of plays that are being made, momentum shifting plays. You're going to have to force turnovers. I don't think you can go toe-to-toe with them offensively and what they have going on. Your defense is going to have to make plays. And so that brings us to our final thoughts and predictions here. I kind of got into a little bit of that there, but obviously this is a game where you look at the spread, and I believe this is currently still, by the time we're recording this, Georgia Tech is an 11.5-point underdog. They lead the all-time series 32-22-3. It's a night kickoff inside Bobby Dodd. And I said at the beginning of the show, if you've made it this far, we appreciate you. I said at the beginning of the show, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. Did I want to continue the reverse psychology, or did I wanted to pick Georgia Tech outright? I'm going to roll with this one. I think Georgia Tech loses this football game. I think North Carolina wins. I think that they bounce back. I just don't see them making the same mistake twice. Now, I could be wrong, and we could be having a good time on Saturday evening. But what I will roll with this one is that I do think North Carolina wins this game. I do not think they cover the spread. I think a 10-point win. Let's say 34-24 in favor of the Tar Heels on what should be a beautiful night in Bobby Dodd Stadium. My name is Bryce Koon. That's our prediction. We appreciate you so much for tuning in. Let us know down in the comments what you think, what you want to see in this football game. We got the preview out a little bit later in the week. That's due to some technical issues, but we're going to be back Saturday evening. 10 to 15 minutes, give or take, after the final whistle of Georgia Tech, North Carolina. We're going to be going live, taking your calls, talking ball. It's going to be a lot of fun. Make sure to join us. It should be a very, very fun time. And then once again, we'll be live back on our regular schedule starting next week. My name is Bryce Koon. This is Swarm Talk, a branch of the Crowded Booth Podcast Network. We've got great stuff. We've got a new podcast coming up centered on a team that I think Georgia Tech fans will really, really enjoy. Going to be announcing that here in the coming weeks. A brand new thing that we had a lot of help from some of our viewers to be able to put together. Stay tuned. Stay subscribed. If you haven't already, hit subscribe on the button down below. Make sure you like the video, set up notifications so when we go live. For Ralph Leary in the background, my name is Bryce Koon. We'll see you next time here on an episode of Swarm Talk, brought to you by the Crowded Booth. Preview North Carolina, Georgia Tech.
Pile in here and make yourself feel at home. The Crowded Booth is coming on. The Crowded Booth with Bryce Koon.